I am debating bringing you this piece. I've actually sit here and I've hemmed and hawed. I got my partner on one side of the camera. You can't see. I got my wife on the other side of the camera. I just told my partner, I said, turn the camera on. We're going to see where this goes. There is a way that you have to speak in life at certain times. It would not matter if you couldn't stand a person. If that person died, you do not, in that moment, say anything ill. Can we all agree, just for example? And as strong as that might be, the death of a career still does bring a mourning process. And Henry Cejudo is a friend of mine. He's also been a partner of mine. We've worked together and commentated a number of times. We visit socially. And I followed his career, and I followed it as a fan. And I've been very critical at times in his career. But it came from a good spot, which is I believed in him. So now that we are removed from his fight with Mourning, which I believe is going to be Henry's last fight, but now that we're there, we still need to be able to look back because this is one of the greats. And when you have one of the greats, there's things that you can study. And it's generally to identify, emulate, and copy. But at times, even with the greats, there's things you want to study to identify and perhaps criticize. And you would talk to them and say, would you do it differently if you could go back? Look, history has a way of repeating itself. Can we agree? Okay. Then let's talk a little history on Henry Cejudo. In 2008, he made history. He was not an NCAA All-American. He's not an NCAA champion. In fact, he didn't have a scholarship and didn't even wrestle under the banner of the NCAA, not one single time. The only American that can say as much and made a United States Olympic team. There has been guys that were not NCAA All-Americans that made Olympic teams. That's huge news. Henry Cejudo never even competed under the NCAA. It's fascinating. Not only made the team, he won the gold medal. It was the youngest American ever to win a gold medal. Henry Cejudo had an Olympic championship and could not legally go into a bar. That is an amazing accomplishment. Okay. Now, it changed his life. All of a sudden, Henry wasn't just a successful athlete. That had been true since junior high. Henry had a medal. Henry was on top of the podium. Henry's being recognized. None of that was new. That had been happening since junior high. It was just cloaked with success. But now, because of the gold medal, he's got different people wanting a piece of his time. He's got people that want to give him money. He's got people that wanted to give him a car. He had people that wanted him to write a book, and he had people that wanted him to go and do speaking tours. I read the book, and I've been present at a number of those speaking tours. Henry enjoyed it. For the first time ever, he was actually enjoying being recognized and being patted on the back for the accomplishments that he got through sacrifice and hard work. But when it took time. And as time is going by, 2012 and the Olympic trials are seeping closer and closer. And now there's a discussion, is Henry going to come back? Henry hadn't competed since that Olympic gold medal. It looked as though he was turning the page. He said that he was turning the page, but nobody fully believed it. And it's very hard for somebody who's 24 years old, right in the prime of their life, that's got the whole world looking at him, not to mention a community that they're part of, asking them, please come back, we need you. So Henry finally raises his hand. He says, I'm going in. Now the question is, okay, well, who's training you? Terry Brands, according to Henry himself, was the secret ingredient that could not be done without when it led to that Olympic team and that Olympic gold medal, and all of a sudden Terry Brands is nowhere around. As a matter of fact, we had a very hard time finding out who officially was Henry's coach at that time and what officially was the team he was associated with. It was very difficult to get those answers, but one thing was constant, which is Henry knew, I am the best, I will make the team. Now, I believe in hindsight, if we could go back and get in Henry's mind, I think Henry's thought process was the Americans got nothing for me. I'm going to go out and make the Olympic team. Now, between the trials and the Olympics, I'm going to really need to buckle down and sacrifice. I know that, and I am going to do it. We'll get to that after the trials. Well, we don't know what Henry had in planned. And we don't know who that head coach was going to be, and we don't know what team that would be. Because he didn't get through the trials. He ran into Nick Simmons. Nick Simmons had been watching him. He'd been studying. He'd been planning for him. While Henry is thinking about the Russian and Henry's thinking about the Iranian in the Olympics, of which he's not yet qualified for, Nick Simmons is thinking about Cejudo. And it changed the course of history for Henry's personal wrestling career. And it caught him by surprise. He genuinely was stunned that he didn't make the team. Okay, great. Now, the reason I say that history repeats itself. Henry Cejudo was the champion of the world going into a title defense against Dominic Cruz at something called UFC 246. He put on one of the great performances, stopped being one of the greatest fighters ever. Not just of the weight class. Not just that Henry had to face to that point. Dominic Cruz is as good as any fighter to ever call himself a fighter. Henry not only beat him, he stopped him. It was this incredible moment. Henry's on top of the world. Henry handed it all back. He took the belt off and he handed it back. Now again, much like when he retired from wrestling, we didn't believe it. We didn't think he meant it. And we were right, because sure enough, in 2012, he came back. And sure enough, in his fighting career, he didn't fully mean it. He did come back, but now there's a question of who's training him and what gym does he even train at? To the extent that Henry himself became the coach. We were seeing Henry Cejudo in other people's corners. A coach is so incredibly selfless. You're there for the athlete. An athlete is one of the worst people you're ever going to be around because they're so selfish. It's nearly impossible to do both at the same time. In fact, I've never seen it done successfully. I thought Henry would be the exception. But it's one of those situations where it appears that history repeated itself. And Henry got comfortable. I thought that Henry's fight with Merab was awesome. I thought that he stood up. I thought he traded punches. I thought his conditioning was there. I thought he found a way to maximize his potential, shorten it into 15 minutes. But ultimately, one guy does a better job than the other. One guy's a little bit hungrier. One guy wants it a little bit more. One guy wants that taste. And I felt as though we saw that with Merab, and now Henry is saying that he's done. I happen to believe him. When you have somebody with that level of success, like there's nothing about Henry's career that I would critique, and there's nothing even about Henry's performance that I would have a hard time with in this moment. All I would ever say to Henry is thank you for the moments and congratulations. Henry says he's the greatest combat athlete of all time. He might be right. Nobody's got the resume of Henry Cejudo. But before we start talking about the youngest Olympic champion ever, and before we start talking about the 35-pound champion in the UFC and the 25-pound champion in the UFC, before we start talking about the guy that quite possibly saved an entire division, before we graduate and start talking about what could be one of the most decorated coaches, if that's the pursuit he goes on, there is another side of the coin, which is not every decision that was made was a perfect decision. And if you're paying Henry full respect to watching his career, you got to bring his wrestling career into it. And if you want to question at times where perhaps he was on one road that led to success and perhaps he took detours, got a little comfortable, you wouldn't be wrong. And history does repeat itself. And I feel it repeated itself again here.